is Al Nodarse. I'm with Faithful Friends, and I want to welcome all of you coming to this event. We're super excited, and a friend of mine, Drake Snodgrass, who Lungi knows, happens to be on the board for the Japanese garden. And I remember, can you guys hear me okay in the back too? Okay, so I won't use a microphone. And it was funny because Tim, my colleague, and I were at Drake's office, and we were talking, and I knew about Lungi because I'm also a college professor, and he talked about his visits. And he said, just casually, oh yeah, Lungi's going to be here in Portland. I said, really? And he said, yeah, she's going to be here for a couple of weeks. I said, well, man, he goes, what if I gathered some students, and we had her speak to them? Could we do that? And he says, yeah, because, we're not in LA or San Francisco. This is Portland, and we're in Gresham of all places. So I just felt like, this is a great opportunity to get some folks to hear Lungi's story and help inspire us. So thank you, Lungi, for being here. So I want to thank some folks here. We have Brianna Dumas. Where's Brianna? Right here. She's with Friends of the Children, which is one of our mentoring partners. So thanks for coming out. And we also have Mount Hood Community College, which is hosting us. So let's hear it from Mount Hood Community College. And Dr. Scari, who is the president of the college, is out of town. But one of the things I want to share with everybody here is that there's some amazing talent that's in this room. And even though it's a small, intimate group, there's a lot of amazing resources here. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have this event, because as corny as it sounds, I think there's a reason that we're all here, and if we can't make the world a better place, if we can't support each other, to love each other, to help, then why are we here? So I'm hoping that we can all get a little inspirational nugget from the conversations here, to make the world a better place. Part of why we geared this also is because when I knew about Lungi's story, being a woman and a woman of color, I thought, gosh, it's just great to be able to talk about that. I don't want to offend any guys in the room here, but part of the reason that I think it's important because, I'll ask a question, see if anybody knows this. So if you were to look at the Fortune 500, the largest companies out there like GM and Tesla and so forth, what percentage of the CEOs are women? Anybody know? Anybody want to guess? It's less than 30%. Yeah. And then when you take the board of directors, because each of these CEOs have boards, and they typically have 12 to 20 people, what percentage of those do you think are women? It's 25 to 30%. It's pretty small. Yeah, exactly. And although we've made amazing headway in this country and many parts of the world, we still got a ways to go. So that's what I wanted to do is kind of help inspire ladies, people of color, really everybody to do that, because I saw this amazing documentary about Iceland, and they were the first country to have a woman president. We're talking over 50 years ago. And it's illegal to have a board of directors and have 60% men or 60% women. It has to be 50-50. And I feel having that balance is really, really critical because, you just get different perspectives in being able to do that. And I always joke around, I can say this because I'm a guy, but we do a lot of stupid things, sometimes, having that balance really helps a lot, and if you need proof that sometimes we're not making the best decision, just go on YouTube. A friend of mine sent me this video. It's a merry-go-round, okay? Picture a merry-go-round. And these guys in Russia, they're like in their 20s, and they say, hey, let's put our motorcycle wheel like right up against the merry-go-round so it goes really fast. And I don't know if you guys have seen it, but these guys are like, they get flung out of there. And only guys would do something like that, And there's a reason that insurance for cars is a lot more expensive for guys, and women outlive us too, So there's a lot that we can learn from the ladies in the room. So again, I just want to thank you guys for being here. I do want to do an introduction. We're going to have Dr. Taylor and Lungi come up here. I call it a fireside chat, but we don't have a fireplace. I actually tried to look for one of these little electronic small ones, but we can get some marshmallows and roast them and so forth. Yeah, I actually even with the Michaels, let's see if I can find like a little paper fireplace or something, but no luck there, So I want to introduce Dr. Taylor, Jessica Taylor, because she's going to be interviewing Lungi, and she's the Chancellor at Multnomah campus, which is part of Jessup University. She's also founder of the Leadership Training Institute that basically equips leaders and helps them navigate through crises and help them with their problems and thrive. And we all know with all the challenges with COVID and everything, that's really, really critical. She's basically been sought after a lot as a coach and a speaker and a trainer. And she's really been known for guiding organizations through some pivotal moments. And I always say that when your back is against the wall, when things are tough, that's when you really learn what somebody is made out of. And Dr. Taylor has shared some of their stories because they just recently went through a merger and they just went through all these different challenges. And she's done a great job there. She grew up in Portland, so I think this is a great success story.
East County too.
Exactly. So yeah, it's amazing because when you look at her school path, I mean, basically she started at St. Mary's Academy, and then she has a bachelor's in human development and family studies at Warner Pacific. Then she has a master's from Liberty University, a little farther away, in a Master of Arts in Human Services. And then she's also been to George Fox, Multnomah University. So almost every campus around here, she has quite a bit of knowledge here. And I remember that Tim and I met Dr. Taylor a few months ago, and we both walked away after we met with her, and we're like, wow, she's like a force of lightning, man. I mean, it's just like, you just don't meet people like this. So when we put this together and we're starting to look for somebody to interview Lungi, we just knew that you'd be a perfect choice for that. So let's hear it for Dr. Taylor. Thank you. All right. And I'll introduce Lungi, okay, which is why we're here. So Lungi was born in South Africa. I won't say the year, even though it's on your bio, okay? And you, by the way, you look much younger than...
we just put it out there. I'm 51.
Yeah, 51. Okay, you said it, not me, right? Okay. Yeah, but she was raised in Nigeria for a decade, starting at the age of 3. Her family spent some brief time in different parts of southern Africa, including Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and Botswana. And she's a global person. She's lived all over the world. She's lived in London, in Oslo, Norway, in Brazil, in Auckland, New Zealand, where she started as a young adult and where she studied. Her academic qualifications are really amazing. She has a master's degree in social anthropology, and her focus was on indigenous knowledge systems, and also a degree in sociology, both from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. She's also studied through the Harvard Business School, the BRICS Economies program. And her life work basically encapsulates her drawing from ancient modalities, knowledge enshrined in African heritage, and practices that are pertinent to reimagining our shared community. Basically she wants to bring the world peace and empathy. It's becoming a collective lived experience. And I think that Lungi definitely does that. One thing I haven't mentioned, you guys probably already know because you saw it in the flyer, she happens to be the granddaughter of Desmond Tutu. And one of the things that I think is amazing, because I got to see Lungi speak last week, is that, when you have somebody that famous as a family member, sometimes it can be a lot of a burden. And Lungi said that she felt that it's basically a privilege and it's a gift. And she's done a lot, to help honor the family's name, but also make her own path also. But she just has amazing experience. She's a soccer mom. She's got proof right there, the cast. You can ask her. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to start with don't mind me. I'm just a soccer mom. I wasn't even playing. I was watching the game and the ball came.
And you blocked it?
Yeah.
That's a good soccer mom right there.
Yeah. Yeah, most soccer moms would never do that. I'll tell you that. So that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
On the goalie, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So let's hear for Lungi. Lungi, thanks for being here. So Lungi and Jessica, if you guys want to take, I say guys, I'm from the South. Guys with gals. You want to take a seat here at the front here. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a little interview where Jessica's going to talk to Lungi and ask her some questions. We're also going to have time for a Q&A for any questions that you guys have. And we're just here to be inspired, so I want to thank you guys, and I'll just let you take it away. Thanks, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you so much. This is an honor to be with you. This is super fun.
What a privilege. It really is. And thank you all so much for the opportunity. I think that, I feel at home. And, it's such a privilege. Thank you.
Yeah. Feel free to come up if you want to come closer as well.
Don't be shy. We won't bite.
Yeah, don't be shy. We want to be together. This is a great conversation, and it's great to have you, students and folks from the school. So as was mentioned in your bio, your family has quite the legacy. Yeah. But would you mind just starting with talking to us a little bit about how has that impacted you, and how have you made your own path within that legacy?
Yeah, it's such an interesting time, I think, when you look back, as a woman, an African woman, a woman of color in the world, and you reflect on where you've come from. And I happen to come from a family of really strong matriarchs. So,
beautiful.
my granddad is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
He's the sort of the public facing.
Yeah, tell us about the women.
Yeah, but the women are strong.
Yeah.
And he often would say, I mean, I had the privilege of attending a few speaking engagements with him, and I'll come back to your question because it's pertinent to, you know, how he would also recognize the women. His wife, Gogo, we call him Gogo, so in my language, Gogo means grandma. And he would often, you know, just reference her role in building him up. But I think even beyond that, my aunts, my mother, just, you know, without those women in their role, not only in the maternal sphere, but also just in their resilience. And it's such a funny word because we often talk about resilience. But yeah, I really think that our life, both in exile as refugees, so we were political refugees, and we'll come back to that in terms of the South African sort of political system, and my parents been, you know, having to run away and seek refuge elsewhere. But it was really that those communities of women, both at home and beyond, who really supported not only my parents, but, you know, those who were at home, who were not able to leave. To be safe. So I think, it's an incredible privilege to reflect back to say what has informed my own sense of identity, my own sense of resilience, overcoming, being a single mom today. You know, it's all of these things that are, they create the wholeness of who we are, the wholeness of who we become, even in the challenge, even through, you know, the most challenging circumstances. It now in your 50s, you start to go, okay. It kind of all starts to make sense, you know?
Yeah, thank you. Kind of following up to that, when you are thinking about those cultural identities and those family identities, and then your own path and your own ambitions, how do you balance both of those? Because sometimes they might clash.
Yeah, you know, identity is such an interesting term or framework. It's the pieces that we build at every different life stage. But my life experience has been formed by so many diverse sort of cultural systems, from leaving South Africa to going to another part of the continent, which is on the continent but different. So Africa's not homogenous, and meeting West Africans who really actually informed my sense of what it means to be African, and this sort of strong identity. And they're not shy people. I mean, you may know some Nigerians. A lot of African Americans have Nigerian heritage, so there's this real stealth around. Yeah, you must. Yeah, you know, strong identity. The colonial system in Nigeria was kind of, you know, it was one of the first countries to be sort of free. So cultural identity there is something that, you know, they're fearless, right? So I was raised in that community, although I came from South Africa. So that identity has really played a really important role in my Pan-Africanism. So I identify as being born in South Africa, but I'm actually a passionate Pan-African. And by that, I mean, I don't see one country on the continent as just the country that I belong to. I believe in the whole of the continent being and forming. You know, it's 54 nations, not even states. It's 54 different countries that form Africa, and 54 different cultures. But I feel so strongly that each of those makes Africa what it is and what it contributes to the world. So to answer your question, I'm Pan-African, and I celebrate my Pan-Africanism, but I also believe in the African diaspora and the role of Africans who came, you know, to different parts of the world, like the America in terms of the slave trade, but also the South, Brazil and different parts of Latin America. And that diaspora plays a really important role in bridge building. So like me, I may have lived in so many different parts of the world, but I find a huge sense of kind of affinity to Africans in the diaspora because they've also had to adapt. So I find that I'm sort of a chameleon. I can adapt really quickly when I am outside of the continent. And so these matriarchs, my identity, the movement, the little bit of instability builds a sense of resilience, even when you think about studies and academia and you know, becoming an entrepreneur. You really draw and you triangulate those life experiences and life circumstances, and even being a minority sometimes. You were talking about women in the boardroom and so on. How do you bring that life experience even into the workspace?
Thank you. So I heard bridge building and just the connection to more than just one country, one state, one identity.
Yeah.
What's that been like to have a multitude of identities, and you have a good command of the language around that? So tell me, for those of us who are developing our own identities, how did you get the language around that it's Pan-African, that it's the whole diaspora, that it's all of these different things? Where did you start to discover that instead of just, we all might kind of feel pressured to land in one? Yeah.
I think it's a sort of a factor of two things. It's adaptation, because you're often always different. You're often always the other. So I remember passports would be checked and you'd say other, you know, and that is very difficult. And you feel like, where do I belong? So you're always asking, who am I? You know, who are the people that are like me or look like me? And often it may come from a sore place or a place of feeling less than. But then you kind of, as you grow and adapt, so the language would have come from actually questioning a lot and curiosity. Like, even as a kid, I remember thinking, you know, often, you know, who are the people that are like us, or where do we belong, where do we come from? And I think our political sort of background had me thinking a lot about where that home is. So it comes from questioning, it comes from that inquiring mind, but then at the same time, it's the ability, I suppose, that I think all each have in us to really fill in the picture for self, to really find from your own self what resonates. What resonates is, okay, I may be from I may be from this place and I've traveled and lived in many of these different places, but what is it about each of those places that enables my own sense of self to feel at home with myself, you know? And I know it's easier said than done. Like, when you're older, you're kind of like, yeah, I've done this work and I'm at home myself. But I think for me, it's really just the ability to adapt and take the good from each and reflect even on the bad things. It's not so you know, easy things, the challenges of, you know, just being you know, removed from your home and family and relatives, and creating common language around, you know, affinity to people who are also othered, and then together you start to find that sense of community, and you know, this is part of being a part of the global community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about building who you are and the connection with community, are you comfortable sharing any of the experiences that kind of you had to adapt to, that formed for you, okay, now I've landed here, or now I've expanded what I believed about myself, or people like me, or people different than me? Would you tell us just some stories from your background?
Yeah, sure. So when we left the continent, initially I was still a teenager. My dad has finished med school. He initially went to Canada briefly, and that was too cold. And they were drafting for doctors in New Zealand. And that's how we ended up in New Zealand, all the way from kind of, you know, Africa and a little stint in North America. And I was a student, like 13, 14, at school in New Zealand. And at the time, there were not many Africans in Auckland. I'd say there's probably like 3 in the whole of Auckland City, probably 3 academics at the University of Auckland, professors. And I immediately connected to the Maori community, so the Pacific Island and Maori community, who didn't look so much like me. Like, I have afro hair and thicker hair, and so often when you're younger, you know, it'll be the things that you can see are different, like, oh, your hair is different to mine, you know, as a teenager, and oh, this is different to theirs, and but on the whole, my experiences that really connecting to the Maori community, and something that really connected me to the Maori community, even at school, was like the sense of family and how you know church as well, and just this, they're massive families, like the Pacific Island communities. It's like I mean, also I don't know if you know, they have heritage to Hawaii, but they're like 10, 20 people, and girls would be at school and they'd be cousins and that cousin and that cousin. You didn't mess with the cousins, you know, and so there was this real sense of coming together. And they're also a minority in New Zealand, so there's there's a Maori and there's Pacific Islanders. And I really learned a lot about, I may feel like an outsider, but here is a cultural group of people who come together, who care for each other. And so and actually welcomed me into their community. And already that started to form in my mind this idea that we may be different and we may come from different contexts and parts of the world, but I mean, culture seemed to be the one common denominator that connected people. And so I would go and do, I remember we'd have competitions for the Pacific Island, Pacific Island cultural dance competitions. And I'd participate, and I'd be the one person who was a little different, but then, you wear the dress and you do the songs and the haka. And so I really integrated into cultures that were not originally my own, but as a way to begin to form not only a sense of community, but a sense of identity. And then that again would allow me to reflect on, and I wonder what we do where I come from that is similar in terms of celebrating or cultural national days or different heritage.
So you've been connecting, you've been integrating, and it sounds like being brave enough to go join other things.
Courage is a big part of it. I think sometimes we're all different. You kind of introvert, extrovert, but I think even if you're an introvert, that sense of courage just to extend beyond the bounds of your comfort levels, like even attending something like this, it's courageous to go in and listen to somebody who you've never heard of, and in your life, and seek to, I guess, listen in, learn something new. That's quite courageous, and so courage is a big part of it. And and I think it's always on both sides. It's a courage for people to welcome you, but also courage to be receptive.
Well, we're thankful. Thankful for your courage. When you're thinking about just things you're passionate about, either organizations or passion projects or that thing that really drives you, talk to us about your passion.
And so I would say, as a result of those journeys in my life, I think I've always had this fundamental passion for youth and youth work. Young people. I mean, by young people, it's like, from really little kids to 30s, 40s. It's, particularly under 35. So I'm really passionate. So even in New Zealand, actually in 2016, I worked with the young entrepreneurs. In South Africa, I work, I'm on the board of an organization called Lalela, which is, in Zulu means listen. And through the work at Lalela, we support underserved community kids from underserved communities to come to a program after school where they can actually do painting and art and music, as opposed to, be exposed to and be vulnerable, So that's what I do with Lalela and through the arts. I've done so many things. I used to belong to a group in New Zealand as well called Youth for One World, and we sang and did lots of work in kind of peace and building peace through youth activities. We traveled to Australia and even out to Macau in China. So, youth and performance and art and nature have really been. And then I think, women's work and young women in particular, I have activities in terms of supporting programs that advance the work of women, and that I find incredibly inspiring, especially on the continent where we form, young people on the continent. Like 60% of Africa's population is comprised of young people. That's incredible. Like over 50% of people on the whole continent are under 35. And so investing in those young people and investing in those, in the second kind of tier of that demographic is the young women or, budding entrepreneurs. And so investing and supporting their ambitions is a really special thing for me. And I learn a lot. So it's, again, another thing where you're like, I feel like there's all of this stuff going on in the world. And I was thinking about this conversation today, and I was thinking, it's incredible because young people are actually just getting on with it. Like, I love, I know we have all that kind of Gen Z conversations, like, don't mess with the Gen Zs. They will tell you about yourself. But I think the positive side of it, as much as it's a different generation of thinkers, and the good thing is they're thinking outside the box. They're taking charge. They're leading in many respects in technology and entrepreneurship, and women challenging political agenda and perspectives on healthcare, on your body and the autonomy and the sovereignty that women demand and deserve over their bodies. And I mean, across political landscapes, even in South Africa, we have a massive, on the sad side of things, we have a massive issue with what we call gender-based violence. And young women are just going, just become such easy targets. Especially young Black women, the incidence of just murder is so high, and it's intimate partner cases of that. So the work is immense, but we still see just so many brave young women out there still leading, and so it absolutely is a responsibility to do what one can to support that.
I love how you were connecting things to the arts as well.
Yeah.
Even your fashion, your look, you've got this amazing, you are art. And so talk to me a little bit about the creativity that you can put into your own leadership or your own expression, whether that's where you're serving or how you're presenting yourself and literally showing up in the room for those of us who are curious. How do we show up and bring that art and beauty with us?
Absolutely. So I think that being creative, we're all born with some kind of creativity. Whether you're a mathematician, I mean, people don't believe it, but maths and science are creative disciplines in themselves, or a fine artist or a fashion designer or a musician. I think that we're all creative. And I think that creativity is almost the language that we sometimes take for granted, but the language that we can each lean into to find and connect to the one thing I think that, among the things that makes us human. So if it's music or, you might humming in the shower. And then you could take that further to say, well, if it's something I'm really inspired and called to do and have a talent in, it certainly is something we're seeing on the continent. Again, the cultural creative economy of Africa has been booming.
Yeah.
I mean, we know Burna Boy and WizKid and all of these, and fashion, and has taken the world by storm. And back to the question on identity, I think is through Africa discovering or rediscovering its creative prowess. Yeah. It's really enabled young people, like all of these young, vibrant artists to really return to their identity. So creativity has informed a sense of Africa's identity, this renaissance that we're seeing, and ultimately having a seat at the table in the global economy. So think about all the stadia that have been sold out, think about the fashion shows, think about giants. I just came through Atlanta, and I had the pleasure of visiting an exhibition by Swiss Beats and Alicia Keys called Giants, and it's their collection of art that has actually predominantly been from the continent. So what I love about what they've done is, as artists themselves, is collected art and positioned, this collection as a collection from the continent and America. So in a roundabout way, I'm just saying that everyone's finding that through the cultural creative economy, we can, one, find that our identity is there's identity building that happens there. There's, global communities of people who can connect through music, through concerts like the Afro beats and all the music that's coming out of the continent that's influencing the world, as far as Japan and New Zealand, and so the creative economy, I think, is a really unique language that I feel the world is rediscovering anew. That is one way that we could, foster the ideals of kind of shared responsibility, creativity as a tool for healing, creativity as a tool for cultural exchange. We did a program with the Portland Japanese Gardens in South Africa, and it was looking at nature and art, kind of in terms of peacemaking. So the intersection of nature and art in creating platforms for peacemaking. And ordinarily you'd be like, nature, art, like how do those come together? But it was the most incredible, sort of collaborative experience where a team from the Portland Japanese Gardens came to Cape Town and Johannesburg, and had these series of symposia which it was informed by like a commissioning art competition, poetry, music, but also panels. So the creative economy is vast, but it's also, I feel like, as I said, a language that we can draw and leverage from our center of gravity. So you might be from Portland and be interested in photography. There's a photographer in the room taking beautiful pictures, as I see up there, of diverse students on this campus, and that might be something that's shown all the way in Cape Town or Japan or New Zealand, and suddenly we can have conversations about that lens, or who those students are, or what their interests are, and so through something as simple as photography, So I really think the creative economy is a low-hanging fruit medium or channel that connects us all.
Thank you. So we all have something in that space, even if you don't feel talented in the fine arts. I love all the different ways that you name things, and that it's a leverage for peacemaking, for leadership, for opportunity, for community. So can we talk a little bit more about leadership?
Yes.
We're looking in our country at leadership right now, right now, if I can call the political space that. So tell me, what do we need to be thinking of when it comes to how we each show up, especially women, especially people of color, in the leadership space that's been dominated maybe by people that don't look like us? How should we be looking at showing up and bringing all those beautiful things that you've talked about into leadership spaces in our own context?
I think what I love about, I'd answer by saying I followed a lot of what's happening in the U.S. In the political landscape, and some of the good things that I've really observed is the people who in the past didn't really have a voice are finding their voice, and I really, Amanda Seeley's, and I know there are different, sort of sides of that conversation, but it's finding voice and giving voice, and not even waiting for it to be given, but it actually claiming your place in kind of that, in the conversation, in the leadership conversation. I think that agency around prioritization of the voice of women, the voice of minorities, even in the context of the really awful things that are going on around the world, it's actually challenging censorship, challenging the politics of, sort of conglomerates that want to censor and determine who speaks when and how. I think that, there's also micro communities, the communities within the communities who will create their own platforms. That is leadership. That is saying we come from a world that wants to kind of stratify by a sort of, global political agenda or global economic agenda. But thanks to technology, or thanks to this exposure of the fact that actually we have the ability among us to organize and kind of mobilize, giving voice is a really important leadership tool that I really admire. And then I see, more and more women of color creating opportunities to have conversations, and I think that is really powerful. I'm learning so much about, there's people who are creating podcasts, and someone would be like, I started this podcast last year, and suddenly there's like 6 million followers, because people are just seeking out authentic, open conversations like this that are not alienating but engaging. So I think really leadership is really about giving voice, enabling people to come together, whether it's kind of formally or informally, and then driving and being kind of like that tipping point that says actually we can actually determine, we have the power, or we can take back the power, if you like, from these sort of what we call, I suppose, established hegemonic systems. And the world is really on the precipice of a really interesting shift, and I think we can all feel it. We can feel it, whether it's nature telling us in the way that we have not really honored our environment, or if it's the balance of power in different quarters that we see, the call for more women, and even if it's not your politics, but just the realization that the imbalance is what is creating this sort of world of, I suppose, dissonance, because there's a great deal of dissonance when you're not balanced. I love the idea from a community in New Zealand that says, humanity is like the wings of a bird. A bird cannot fly if one wing is not, is not able to move or hurt or just not open out fully to its full potential. And so, humanity is like the wings of a bird. And if we can allow both wings to be strong and able and nurtured, that bird just, the sky is the limit. So I think that balance is really something that resonates also in leadership. Boardrooms need to be more, and it's not about checkboxing either.
Right.
It's tickboxing. It's that authenticity to saying everybody deserves to be heard and everybody's voice matters.
Thank you. And thinking about that balance that you're talking about, would you speak to our male identifying friends in the crowd who are here, or who would be scared to come in here because they thought, this conversation isn't for me? What would you say to them about entering into the conversations about women and people of color?
Yeah, I think I would really honestly just say to not feel inhibited by cultural, social, familial constructs of what it is to be in the room with women. I think everybody, each of us, is with our DNA, had the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And I think my grandfather used to say God is a feminist. And I mean, he'd say that and people are like, oh my God, the arch blasphemy, but it's this idea that we, not to feel inhibited by, the world or the community that tells you to be a woman is this or to be a man. Yes, we certainly have our roles. There's, the protector, the caregiver, the nurturer. But I think to come into conversations with fresh eyes and an open mind and a sense of humanness first before whatever we identify as in terms of our gender. Because I think women do that fairly well. We can sit around the table with a bunch of guys and men and kind of listen. And I think that's an innate gift we have, but also at a certain point we're like, well, actually I need you to listen to me and hear my perspective. So we're very good at affording people, but I think our men need to just be around the table and not feel so overwhelmed with the ideology of what masculinity is, and then actually just be open to
So I'm hearing we can all challenge maybe our ideas of constructs, but also decide in a space, do I need to make space or do I need to take space?
Correct.
What is that?
Absolutely. And being sort of deliberate in that. I was speaking to somebody earlier today to say how nature teaches us to listen, and it kind of allow you. So you go to a garden or you go to a park, and if you're present enough and open enough and still enough, there's stuff you can glean. And so I think even in these conversations, if you're present enough and open enough, you can really kind of be attuned to what that moment requires of us. And sometimes it's just to be present. So we honor the gentlemen in the room who are here to be present with us, and to honor these conversations.
Thank you. When you're thinking about, especially Indigenous studies and these things, and you think about ancestors and you think about descendants, what would you want us to say about you as an ancestor? What would you want descendants to think about you and your work and the legacy that you want to leave?
Thank you. That's such a very special question, at least in my heart, because I often, the other night, I opened a event where we were honoring Steve Bloom, who's leaving the gardens, and I opened, and even when I wrote that opening, I opened by honoring the ancestors of this land. In Maori, they open any event with a karanga, and a karanga is to acknowledge the ancestors who were here before. And I mean, it's not even, it sort of transcends, even if you're Maori or Indigenous or the First Nation people, it's to say your people and your people and your people and your ancestors, even if they were Scottish or, Jewish or, that they were here before and they paved the way for us to be here, and they're still with us. And so when we acknowledge that, we really are tapping into a sentient, inherent sacredness that actually makes each of us human in the physical. And when we're tuned to that, then we're actually, you know, that saying of, I come as one, but I stand as one, but I come as 10,000.
Yeah.
It's the same idea that we acknowledge, you know, those who've paved the way. So I would hope that, you know, in instances like this, my ancestors, I mean, before I left, I acknowledge my ancestors. I go to the ocean. As much as I pray and I go to the cathedral and pray, I also I go to the ocean and I speak to my ancestors and I say, you know, please open the way, and I'm grateful for all that you have gifted me in the physical, and I ask that I could be of service in the way that I'm called to be of service. So that I'd hope that they, you know, would acknowledge that we honor those who've come before us, and we honor people of different lands that we step into. That is a form of respect.
Yeah.
It's a form of not take it for granted that we're just here. We just roll up, and you know, it's really living in communion with the sacredness of nature, but also the sacredness of our humanity, in honoring those who've come before us.
Thank you for those reminders. And I think if you will leave us with this question, because I know that we will transition into more Q&A, which is I'm excited to hear from everyone in here. If you had a piece of loving wisdom to give to your younger self, if you were sitting in this room, what might you say, this is something to hold on to? What gem might you want to tell yourself?
I actually thought you might ask that. So I thought about it because I'm always thinking about my younger self. I really would say to my younger self, grace. Give yourself more grace. Give yourself more gentleness and softness. The world is a hard and often jarring place. It's jarring where we deal with so much as people from so many parts of the world whose ancestors and even family have migrated, have integrated. You may not speak your first language. You navigate, you think in 4 or 5 languages before you get to the dominant language, and people look at you like, oh, you're dumb, you can't even, you know, and you come away feeling, you know, some kind of way. And I can remember that, and I can remember, and then I became this perfectionist who's always like hard on myself. And so now I think, you know, in all of that, I would say to my younger self, just remember to give yourself grace, and grace is also a sense of gratitude, self-love. I mean, we call it self-love now, but I love the word grace. It's just grace and compassion are such it's the softness, just the softness for ourselves. It's the softness of, if you feel rushed, take a breath and say, what would I say to my friend? I know there's the cheesy things we read on Instagram, but actually practicing it makes a difference. It's like, if my friend was feeling rushed and what have you, what would I say to her, him, or they? I'd say, hey, take a breath. You could do this. And I do practice that with myself now, and I find it makes a huge difference, because it's a really hard time in the world, and we just each have to come with grace.
Thank you for that gift, and I think that's a beautiful juxtaposition between the power and the agency you talked about, the creativity and the job that we all have to do stepping into our calling, but also putting that with the softness of we get to be fully human as well. So thank you for sharing your humanity and your story, and I know that we have some time just to open the time. Thank you. Thank you. It's beautiful.
So anybody have any questions that they want to ask? Don't be shy.
How are you liking Portland so far?
I love it. It's so, I was just saying how everyone's just so friendly, and I love it. Nature all around. It's fall. I've never been here at this time of year, and it's just so beautiful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Tim?
I was reading an article today about French-born Africans who are recognizing that they never really fit into France, and there's almost this silent wave of immigration now going back to West Africa or wherever maybe they have heritage in Africa, and then not feeling like they belong there either.
Yes.
What are you seeing from those that have generationally migrated to other countries where might be majority white, returning, like in the article they talked about how they feel like it's almost like Africa is like this upcoming rising thing, and there's nowhere else in the world really maybe like that, and they're excited to go in and try to bring their education and their experience to that setting. What do you see?
Exactly. I mean, it's such a good point. I lived in Ghana from like 2018, and there was this campaign, you may have heard of it, the Year of Return, and it was just recognizing 400 years since, and so there was this upswell of African Americans who went back to Ghana, and beyond just that moment, there's just been this consistency again, like the French, of diaspora Africans going back and connecting on the one hand, but also sort of really identifying the responsibility that they feel. Nobody's forcing them to contribute to that to development in that community. But I think the inverse is also true, that the communities enable them to reconnect to their heritage, and so there's this real vibrant moment when these different communities come together. I mean, I felt the same as an African diaspora in a way, moving from New Zealand to back to South Africa. And it's challenging because initially you just feel still like an outsider, even though you're originally born there or originally from there. But over time, you find loads of diaspora communities are almost, the African Union calls it the sixth region. So the diaspora at Africa's sixth region, and when there's representatives of that sixth region come back, it just amplifies. It just and then it reconnects the world, because those people go back. Maybe they're from France or America or Europe, and they feel like, well, the world is bigger than just my street. Yeah. So it really, I think, in two things: it gives back locally, but it also expands the world view of people who may have been born in a certain environment and kind of wondered about this other environment. They're suddenly like, it's not, it's not so rigid after all. Hope that answers the question.
Any other questions?
Oh, yes. So we had an event last week at the Chamber of Commerce, and you spoke briefly about the relationship between authenticity and community.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could expand a little bit about that. So how can we be true to ourselves and even our lineage, we carry that responsibility, but also be our own authentic selves in our community and build communities and bridges?
Absolutely. Thanks, Paula. We have the privilege of working with Paula on the symposia, and this was something that really came up in the work that we did. So community from Portland and the Gardens come to South Africa and connect with our community, but also even myself as an individual. I think it's such a fine line. It's this balance again of when we can kind of stay attuned to ourselves and the things that we feel great passion and kind of resonance about, then we're able to contribute to that community with more authenticity. I think it starts from inside out. It's the sense of, and I know it's hard, I mean, we're all juggling so much, but I think it is that quiet time or that ritual that you'll do, and even if it's just, sitting or listening to music, whatever, because I think the more we can fill and be clear about the value systems and the framework that we subscribe to, it's patience, it's kindness, it's speaking truth to power, it's standing up for somebody else if we feel that they're being undermined or their voice is being undermined. That's a very sort of, that's authenticity in practice. And then we see how that can actually, when we get to that level of community, we're in practice of living authentically ourselves, that by the time we connect in a bigger community setting, then we're not out of balance or out of sync with that practice, and therefore it really it imparts a sense of amplification, collaboration, and actually Marianne Williamson says it so well, it sort of liberates the other person to feel that they too can live their authentic self. So there's this duality of, if I liberate myself, if I can liberate myself to be, true to me, then in that practice, it's not telling the other person what to do or imposing. It's just by being yourself, you almost liberate the other person to be like, I see Paula's like so, proud about her Colombian heritage, but she lives in Japan, but she's not an authentic to Colombia, or her work in Portland. It's so liberating. You're suddenly like, oh my gosh, I can be myself too. I can be true to the community that I serve without diminishing anything about myself that is valid.
Thank you. Awesome. Any other questions? Go ahead, Tanya. You first, and then we'll back here.
Yeah. So just for like young youth, so like kids that are maybe that are mixed, like white and black, parents, or Hispanic and African American, and like who are struggling with that identity piece. Like what? Obviously, their brains are still developing, and there's so many different emotions or things. But like any kind of advice that you would give a young person that figuring out who you are as a teen is already really hard.
Yes.
and then being like from different cultures and being like, who am I then?
Right. It's such an important one, and also I think so many people deal with that globally. I think in friends who have children and families of that mixture, and even in our society in Cape Town, where we have communities who come from mixed cultures and races, I think my strongest observation where this plays out positively is when we can almost allow that young person or child to ask the questions that are uncomfortable about, who, did you know, or that kind of question around, did you know that your mom comes from this community? Did you know that your dad comes from, depending on, I suppose, the age-appropriate language or tonality. But if it's a teen, I think with teens, it's much harder. I have a 17-year-old. It's really hard. Younger, I think it's the did you know, and then connecting that, and like, did you know that those two communities form a part of who you are, and that part is a whole person, and it's this idea of one not being more than the other, and just that wholeness, and that my mom used to share this one with us, is like, a garden looks so much more beautiful when it's more colorful. That's probably for the younger age groups, and that the idea that the beauty comes from diversity. But I found that when my friends would always ask her kid, did you know, or even toys that they'd used to play, and saying these, they can coexist. I think with teens it's a little trickier, but I think with teens in terms of forming identity, and I have worked with some teenagers both at La Lela and I think it's really allowing them to ask the questions, and that they're most, I suppose, sometimes burdened by. It's like, I'm not accepted in this, and I don't feel accepted in that, so clearly I'm not enough. That's the kind of approach, and I think it really is enabling teenagers and young people to feel like, even in the difficult questions and the difficult moments, allowing themselves to just be with those questions, and then looking at examples where, whether it's in sports or in music or in fashion or in, where that diversity exists tangibly. I think it's the examples, and also just the constantly having them ask the questions and allowing that freedom. Yeah. Hope it helps.
Got a question in the back?
Excuse me.
So a couple of questions. Are you from New Zealand, or are you from Africa?
I'm from South Africa.
And
Yes.
Cape Town?
At Cape Town, correct, yes.
And your religious background is what?
Well, my family are Anglican, yeah.
Is what?
Anglican.
Ac-
Anglican? Yes.
Your area, we'll just say far as Cape Town,
Yes.
that's a little bit up and coming, I would say. What about the outside areas? We'll say like Rwanda.
Yes. And Kenya, and
Yes.
yeah, and DRC.
Yes. What about those areas? Do you have any comments on those areas? As far as what path they're going on? The country itself, their leaders, or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. So earlier we were talking about the fact that Africa is comprised of 54 countries, not states, so they're sovereignties in and of themselves. They have presidents, heads of state, and so on. And so that diversity, north to south, east to west, Africa is just massive. Southern Africa, where I'm from, so South Africa is one country in Southern Africa. Southern Africa has had its challenges, South Africa being probably the most known. Zimbabwe's had its challenges with Mugabe, who's passed away, and then now they kind of have a massive economic challenge and crisis. You ask a really good question. Africa is going through a great deal, and it always has. I think a post-colonial Africa is a really interesting conversation. But there's also a massive... I was at the UN 2 weeks ago in New York, and a side conference at the UN was called Unstoppable Africa. So there's this massive resurgence in terms of, whilst the leaders can be challenged, there are a lot of professionals, young people, creative economy, scientists coming up out of the continent. Technology experts, innovation is booming. We have natural resource on the continent. And so young people and a lot of professionals, some of whom study out in the US and Europe, have come back to contribute, to draw on these resources on the continent, to ensure that whilst the politics of Africa is quite divisive, and it's obviously hegemony, so it's coming not only from Africa, but, a global dynamic, Africa itself and its own professional community is not about waiting for the politicians. It's about drawing from its global diaspora but locals to advance economic development, job creation, peace and stability, safety and security, and also climate change, which we are experiencing quite significantly. Durban, which is a tropical part of my country, had snow. And people who'd never seen, some people had never seen snow, and they're in the traffic for 3 days, stuck out with feet, I can't remember how many feet of snow. Imagine if you were in the desert, which you're not familiar with, and suddenly, so just to say that there are all these dynamics, including climate, which people have to adapt to. And so they're really interesting. It's an interesting time, and I feel it's positive. Although there is a Congo, and there's Sudan, and South Sudan, and all of those challenges, and Nigeria with, the abduction of women and stuff. So I think we, as humanity, will always find that, in the throes of hope and promise, there will always be, the underbelly of the kind of the things that we have to correct and fix and address. But I do feel, I hope to answer your question, that my thought on all of those other markets, particularly the hotspots, Rwanda, Congo, Sudan, I think there's promise, and that I think more Africans and African leaders, the African Free Trade Agreement area is really, there's agency behind Africans finding solutions in Africa for Africa that are not dependent on the global hegemonic system.
Thank you, Lungi. Any other questions from anybody? Go ahead.
In my family, I kind of feel like I have pressure behind me, because my mom's a teacher, my sister's a teacher, my dad's an accountant. I have family members that are somewhat famous musicians and stuff, so I feel a lot of pressure behind me to become something.
Right.
Did you ever feel like that? You felt pressure to become something, or did it come naturally to you to lead people and help people like us find ourselves and stuff? Did you ever feel pressured to get into that position?
Thank you for sharing. I think we're all leaders, and I totally hear you. But I appreciate where you're coming from, in the sense of when you have, I suppose, prominent people in your family or where you come from. I don't know that overtly felt the pressure. Maybe it was implicit in the kind of, overachieving or sort of being a perfectionist and never feeling like I was good enough in a way. So maybe that's a kind of underlying.
I can feel like I have pressure on myself because we're always our biggest critics.
Yes, exactly.
But like sometimes I do feel like when my family members are like,
what are you doing? Yes, yeah. No, absolutely. I think I'm grateful that my family have been, perhaps also because of our political history and how much struggle we came through, right? I'm not saying people haven't come through, but I think because of our very obvious political history and challenges, our family have been very, I suppose, gracious and supportive of just taking it in your stride and doing your bit and, and just keep going and chipping away at what you can do and feeling that support. Sometimes you kind of wish, I wish I had more financial support. I'm like, I need to make more money or, and that's tricky. But I totally agree that, sometimes your hardest critic. I think that more than my family pressure, I think I pressure myself. And maybe it is a subliminal, they expect me to be, but I think it's an important thing, like I was saying earlier, to just give ourselves that grace and just be like, even if they're saying it or maybe they mean, to want you to challenge you to do more, I think you can hear it, or at least I've practiced that lately. It's taken all of however long to perhaps hear it and almost put it and say, okay, maybe they want something of me, and right now this is the best that I can do, and just be like, giving yourself that grace, because I'm sure that your talents and gifts and achievements are, even if you wrote them down, you'd be like, hey, wait a minute, I'm doing quite a lot, I'm doing really great, and it's just trying to sort of silence some of that overarching pressure and just give ourselves grace.
Beautiful response.
Yeah.
Any other questions in the audience? Go ahead, Tim.
I've got a lot, but I'm just going to do one.
I'm going to hold you to it.
Having spent a career in Africa, now my kids are at that point where they're marrying people that grew up in Africa and want to return there because they feel like Africans and they want to contribute there. Now, how would you suggest that posture should be? Because we're in a different era. This isn't, this isn't the same as even when I went there. It's changing a lot. Yeah. And so to go, I guess from your perspective, how would you see foreigners coming to the continent? How can they contribute and work together well with people there?
Yeah, no, and that's such a thoughtful question, because often, we've had the history of Africa feeling like we just get this imposition and people telling us how to, and the blessing of your children having grown up there previously. I think it's forming bonds and just connections with people and learning. And I've seen different groups come in when we do exchange programs with students from other parts of the world. I think it's paying attention to what already is in the community and the things that a lot of people are doing so much. I mean, you'd be surprised. There's agricultural projects, there's creative projects, there's, so many things. And I think it's saying from where your children or the community come from, what value are you bringing, but also meeting each other at a place of shared value, if you like, but I think it starts with just absolutely just learning what already is there. And then forming those connections and bonds, and having people just feel that you see them as people first. That saying, Sawubona. Sawubona, you may not remember it. It means I see you, and it's a greeting we have in South Africa. But it's that sense of our shared humanity is probably our most obvious and immediate connection. So that could be when they arrive, hanging out with kids or going out to a soccer game. It's just doing them everyday things, and then suddenly, people don't feel like there's anything to lose, so to speak. And then obviously project-wise, I think it's always a good idea to kind of experience what already is happening in the community, and then finding, the value that one brings. And vice versa. Yeah.
Right. So I'll wrap this up with a final question, and then we'll still have time because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But if you, after my question and the response, you want to meet Lungi or Jessica or take some pictures or ask questions, we want to have time for that. So my question is, it's a bit loaded because my dad's from Cuba. You know, so and given the history, you know, of South Africa, I've noticed with my college students that there's almost this apathy, you know, about the election. It's like, gosh, I'm not even bothered voting because I just, you know, I'm not being heard, and I can't relate to these folks and things like that. I'd love to get your answer to a response. You know, if you were to hear a young person in their 20s that's registered to vote, that's not thinking about voting because they don't think their voice makes a difference, with the history that what you've seen in South Africa, what would you say to them?
Oh my goodness, it's like, firstly I would say you're going to be, by God's grace, here in 20, 30 years, and who are the people who do you want to make the decisions about your life in 20, 30 years but you, or inform those decisions, right? Because a lot of 40, 50-year-olds might not be here, you know, and so it's like, what kind of world do you want to live in, and how can you pass up the opportunity? Because in some countries people don't even have that right. So we come from a community where, you know, for hundreds of years, people didn't even have a right to determine their existence as people. And they couldn't say where they lived, they couldn't say what school they went to, they couldn't, you know. So I would say that's a privilege that many people don't have too. Do you want people who are older and elderly have had their lives determining your life when you're their age? It kind of doesn't feel fair that people who, you know, may have had their opportunity for 20, 30 years. And so I think for me, young people need to just be conscious of this idea of time and the fact that you may feel like you're a 20-year-old now or 21-year-old or 18, but in 20 years, what kind of society, community, and global community do you want to see? And we have to be the change we wish to see.
Yeah, that's a great response. So let's hear it for Lungi. Dr. Taylor, thank you for your time.
Thank you.